Okay, hey, welcome back. We're going to try to get through chapter 9, which is this new idea on trade and wealth, and the development of and just new ideas on capitalism, how business works. And so when we look back at wealth during the Middle Ages, wealth was always tied to land. And so there was really finite. There was no ability to, I mean, there's only so much land. And granted, like, whatever, the Netherlands make land out of the ocean, but like there's, there's no way nobles have their power tied to the land, and that's based on wealth and ability to form armies for kings. And so we have this landed wealth, right? But as more money comes in, more hard currency, more gold and silver come into Europe from the New World, and new ways to make money and new ventures start to come in. There's people that profit off of that, like people English profit off of by the 1600s start to profit off of colonies like Jamestown, and the Spanish are taking gold and silver out of what is Mexico and South America, and the Dutch are making money off of trade with Asia, and so there's trade, and so like the people that this new group of wealthy people in Europe can actually buy noble titles. And so it creates this tension between the old nobility, which were nobles of the sword and nobles of the land, and now we have nobles of the money or nobles of trade. And so there's tension between those groups, but both groups can agree that they don't like this new merchant class that's bringing in goods and they're trading goods and selling them on a lower level, because it kind of in the eyes of the nobility and the monarchy, it's taken away power from them, right? And so this medieval idea is that the wealth is finite. There's a limited amount of wealth in the world, and then like we look at modern times, and we don't think that there's a limited amount of wealth. There's wealth is infinite. Like you can do whatever you want with it. You can make more. You just have to come up with a new idea. Look at Jeff Bezos. He figures out ways to deliver you toothpaste to your front door, and he makes tons of money. And that money, maybe that money existed before, maybe it doesn't. Maybe money's not even real. Who knows, right? And so, the medieval idea is that there's only so much land, so you can only have so much wealth. Land and gold and silver, those are all limited. But ideas are infinite, and this idea of the Enlightenment comes about, and these merchants start to make money off of trade, and nobody really likes that. And so if you look at the relationship between colonies and their parent country, like the American colonies, the only important part of trade for those mother countries is the fact that they make money off of it, right? And so colonies are supposed to supply their mother country with raw materials, and then the mother country turns those into finished goods and sells them back to colonies or other markets, and the mother country makes money off of that, and then you have a surplus. They bring in gold and silver, and that's the purpose of a colony. It's not to have new places to settle or whatever. The purpose of a colony is to make money, right? And so we look at the mother country here, and the colony brings in gold and silver and food stuff and raw materials, and they provide wealth for that mother country. During that time frame, trade was not necessarily believed to generate new wealth. It was just like it was finite or whatever. And so again, bankers that finance different places are kind of looked down upon by the nobles that were rich at birth or whatever. But bankers like in places like England and the Netherlands were growing wealthy from investing in trade to the New World. They were developing ideas like joint stock companies, like in Jamestown, where I could invest in this company, and they're going to grow tobacco over there and send it back, and we're going to sell it, and we're going to have a profit. And that profit's going to be split up amongst investors, just like it is today. But like they're the first ones to kind of do it back in the 1600s. And so this doesn't fit that model of finite wealth, because I can grow tobacco, and that wealth didn't exist beforehand. And so it changes the way that we look at the pie of wealth. We look at power as like a pie, right? There's only so much power in the world, and how we divide that power up depends on results in how much power you actually have. Like if I have half the pie and I give you part of it, I don't create a new pie. I lose some. And so we're looking at wealth as a pie. but no one's looking at the possibility of baking new pies, and that's what we're looking at during this time frame. No one had thought about wealth as a ability to make a new pie and to make new wealth. And so commodities like sugar and tobacco, they start to change this idea, and early ideas of capitalism take shape. And I just basically boil down capitalism to its one of its roots is the fact that people invest money in a business, and if that money makes money, if that business makes money, then you get a return on your investment, right? And so, hey, I'm going to invest money in Jamestown, and we're going to sell tobacco, and hopefully, I'm going to make money on that. And so nations begin to kind of reassess what it is, what wealth is, what money is, what power is during this time, and they begin to expand these ideas. This gentleman right here is probably going to affect your life more than anybody that we talk about, with a few notable exceptions, and you don't know who he is. That's Adam Smith. Adam Smith actually comes up with a very interesting idea. He comes up with one of the ideas, basically the early model of capitalism in his book called Wealth of Nations, which is published in 1776. And he believes in this idea of a free marketplace, that the marketplace should just be left alone. It should be unregulated by government, and people should set prices on supply and demand, and wages should be set up supply and demand. And he comes up with this idea. It's a French word called laissez-faire, and it's really kind of one of the ideas that Americans like to throw around. It's just this idea of an unregulated marketplace. It's laissez-faire roughly translates to hands off. Like government is hands off. It's not going to get involved in the marketplace. And so Smith believes that in capitalism, you have a division of labor. You have two things. You have capitalists, who are the people that invent. It should be invest. People who invest capital in a business. I need to go back and change that. And labor. And these are let's just do that right now. It's not going to matter. Okay, so these are people that invest capital in a business, and labor are people who work for a wage, right? Like I would assume that most of you guys right now are laborers. If you have a job and you're working for how much money you get paid per hour. Fix. So you guys work, versus what you really want to be is a capitalist who makes money like Warren Buffett, based on the money you invest, like make your money work for you. And Adam Smith also argues for this idea of specialization. Before the idea of capitalism, everybody was kind of a self-sufficient farmer. Like you grew everything that you needed on your little farm. If you had a piece of land, you would grow your food. You would grow, hopefully you'd have access to animal proteins or whatever. And that was enough for everybody. And then if you had a little bit extra, you would trade for things that you couldn't do yourself. Well, Adam Smith says, hey, that's not the way to do it. If I'm really good at making tables like Tom Silva down there from This Old House, then that's all I should focus on, is making tables and fixing stuff. And then I should sell my trade out there to people that are really good at growing corn and wheat and milking cows. And then I can supply my family with what they need, and then I can make money off of what I'm best at. And if I'm not so hot at growing crops, but I'm really good at making tables, and I should focus on making tables, and I should trade those tables for what I need, or for wealth. And that's the idea of specialization. That's what you see in the world today. Everybody is specialized, or at least focuses on one specific job, and so they trade that for things like food and shelter, and that's comes out of the idea of wages, right? And Smith believes that markets and wealth of a nation would increase by itself, and they're regulated by something he refers to as an invisible hand, which basically means that if people go out and are rewarded for doing their best, or rewarded with more business because they supply a superior product, then they will continue to do that, because it's in their best interest. Like, hey, if you're really good at building sports cars, you're going to try to build the best sports car you can. You're not going to skimp on like the brake line, and people are going to start crashing your car, and then no one's going to buy your sports car anymore, right? If you treat customers good, they'll want to come back. And so that's what we're looking at. And so there's our idea of the invisible hand, right? A couple cartoons for you. The government's only role should be to limit monopolies and tariffs that limit trade between nations. So this idea of free trade, and this idea of limiting monopolies. One company should control all the wheat production, or all of the table production, or all the sports car production, or what have you, right? Another early thinker that's going to kind of come out of the Enlightenment as well is Thomas Malthus. And Malthus believes that populations um, kind of dictate the role of government, right? And so he believes that basically the population is going to ultimately outpace the food supply. And what he doesn't necessarily account for is the ability of increased production of food per acre. And so like his ideas kind of get washed out. Smith hangs on, Malthus does not. And he believes that only war, disease, and famine can lower populations. And so he encourages people to have fewer children, right? And so here's his basic theory that your population is going to outpace your resources. And so he's concerned that, hey, that we're having too many babies, because you're seeing this shift as we move into industrialization during this time frame of people coming off of the farms where they had large families, and people starting to move into cities and factory work where you don't need a large family anymore. You don't need those people to help you with those jobs on the farm, and so you need to have smaller families. And Malthus, ultimately, by the time we get into the 1800s, people naturally do start having smaller families. David Ricardo also believes in kind of this idea of population control, and he argues that the poor have too many kids, and that this increase in children is going to drive down wages because factories are going to hire children because they can pay them less, right? And so he does have a point there that factories were hiring kids and we're paying them less, but ultimately again, government's going to fix that. I don't know if Smith would have been in favor of this. I think probably he would have been, in the fact that government should regulate certain things that markets won't themselves. And so, anyways, governments regulate that through child labor today, right? And so we have child labor laws. But early capitalism basically kind of ties all three of those ideas in: specialization, labor, and capital. Malthus argues that people should have less kids. Ricardo argues that child labor drives down prices, and all of these kind of lead to this idea of early capitalism, which is just the system of government and free business in which markets set this price of supply and demand, right? And ultimately, capitalism is going to lead to competition for goods. And so by the 1800s, countries are going out and they're looking to expand colonies and looks in hopes of finding new resources, to bring back goods to turn into things in our factories. And so you're going to see this meshing of the Industrial Revolution and imperialism that we're going to talk about here in the future, that's going to come about during this time frame. And even these ideas of like social Darwinism, in which the best countries are going to have the best colonies, and so we're going to compete for supplies abroad, right? And then how are you going to defend those colonies and those supplies? Well, you're going to use your military to do that. And you can kind of start to almost see that. Well, obviously, I hope we all know that like World War I, World War II is coming. World War I is really going to be one of these results of imperialism and early capitalism, where countries are going out looking for resources and looking to find ways to control areas. So many nations in Asia are going to be conquered or going to be colonized by Europeans during this time, and they're disorganized. You have divisions of once powerful countries that have gone through periods of civil war or disunity, and the Europeans come in and exploit that, right? And so by the 1800s, you can see there, most of the world, a lot of big chunks of the world are going to be colonized by different people. The age of exploration is going to lead to the colonization of the New World. Places in Africa, India, and Asia are going to be controlled as well. India is this great example of disunity that the Mughal Empire once controlled all of India, but as its power peaked and started to decline, the Europeans come in and they start to set up small coastal empires, right? And this is going to be one of our first steps towards imperialism, in which you're going to take the raw materials of other nations and bring them into your country, so you can turn them into finished goods in your factory. The Dutch are actually going to be probably one of the best examples of early capitalism or early capitalist markets. Through imperialism, the Netherlands is going to go out and set up colonies, small trading colonies throughout the world. They're going to act as middlemen and trade between like Russia and Britain and Germany, and so like they're in this really kind of great situation. But one of them, probably the most for us, one of the most interesting things about the Dutch are they're going to be the first example of what's referred to as a speculative market. And we have this huge, there's the Netherlands and the home of the Dutch. And when you think of the Dutch, you probably think of windmills. One of the things that you probably don't think of is tulips. But in the 16 and 1700s, we have this thing called the tulip trade becomes very interesting in the fact that the Dutch are able to create a formalized currency, which was the standard currency of the day. I think it's the Dutch Guild is what it was referred to. You don't necessarily need to know that for anything important. And they organized the first stock market, so you could invest in companies and you could share in the profits, right? And you could invest in trade currencies, you could invest in companies, you could do those types of things, and you could make money off of money. And so they had the Dutch East India Company, in which you could invest in them, and they would trade spices and things from Asia. And they would have ships that would sail all over the world and would be very profitable. The Dutch set up trade with Japan. They're the only country to trade with Japan until the Americans show up in the 1850s. They take control of the Cape of Good Hope at the bottom of Africa and South Africa, and they send settlers down there. And so then you start to see Dutch settlement and Dutch I wouldn't say the Dutch imperialism, maybe a little bit during that time frame, but like the Dutch again are responsible for one of the first examples of speculative markets in which the value of an item necessarily doesn't isn't important, but it's what somebody ultimately will pay for it. And the first thing that we can see there and this is through tulips. And so ultimately, tulips are involved. They're like this weird onion-looking thing that you put in the ground and it grows. And the royalty and the nobility of Europe during this time frame in the late 1700s, early 1700s, late 1600s, really enjoys these ideas of exotic tulips. And so they start to speculate on the value of these tulip bulbs, and they would sell them in tulip trades, and people would show up and they would buy them and they would spend just ridiculous amounts of money on these tulip bulbs in hopes that they could turn around and sell them for a profit. And so from 1620 to 1630, these tulips become very profitable. And in fact, people would spend more money on these tulip bulbs than could spend on a house. Like it's ridiculous. And then you turn around and you sell your tulips and you make money. You sell those tulips and you make money, and everybody jumps onto this, and it works really great until people stop buying tulips. And that's what you see in 1637, 1638, where the tulips fall out of favor and they're not popular anymore, and the price plummets. And so, like, you can tie this back to a couple of years ago when people were Reddit had this run on GameStop stocks, and people were buying and selling GameStop back and forth, and they were driving the price up. And GameStop itself wasn't worth what those stocks were selling for, but people were buying it, which causes the price to increase. And this is a speculative market. You're not necessarily buying GameStop stock to hold on to it because you think you're getting it at a good price. And again, you're not buying these tulip bulbs because you think you're getting them at a good price. You're buying them to sell them at a profit because you think other people are going to buy them. And it works really well until the bottom falls out, and then somebody gets left holding tulip bulbs that they paid $30,000 for. You can watch a short video over there. The Dutch are going to be the first example of a global market in that way. The English are going to kind of base a lot of their economic model off of the Dutch, but their focus is going to be on sugar from the Caribbean, right? And a lot, sugar from the Caribbean and a lot of the transatlantic slave trade. And so an example of a city in England that makes a ton of money from speculating in the slave trade would be Liverpool, in which average citizens like barbers and butchers and and policemen and like maybe school teachers would take some of their income and they would invest it in these slave trading companies that would invest in slave expeditions that would take slave ships from the port of Liverpool, sail them down to Africa, buy people, transport them across the Atlantic Ocean, and then sell them in the slave markets of the New World. And then the profits that they would make from that, they would bring back to the slave company in Liverpool, and they would share those profits with the people that invested. And so, you see people start to basically buy into the sale of other humans during this time, similar to the way that you would go out to you would get on Ameritrade and buy stock in Chevrolet, and you would sell cars or whatnot, right? And so we see that. Okay, so the Glorious Revolution to Waterpool to the Battle of Waterloo sees England rise to one of the world's most dominant trade empires, and that's gonna extend really into the First World War. And one of the reasons for that is that England is going to be on the forefront of the Industrial Revolution. They're going to be the first place that they're going to be one of the first major nations to develop steam power and to develop factories. And so you're going to transition from handmade goods to machine-made goods in England. And England's a small island with lots of colonies throughout the world. And so England comes up with this idea that their workforce shouldn't be spent, like Smith says, their workforce is going to specialize in what they're best at, which is making textiles, making fabrics. And they're going to farm out, per se, the production of crops. And so their colonies are going to grow all the food and ship it into England. And England is going to produce textiles and ship out those textiles and pay for those, right? And so they're going to make a lot of money for that. And they're going to create this new empire in which things like sugar and tobacco and food are brought in, and then England's going to ship out textiles from their sheep. England is also going to control the slave trade. They're going to have the Royal African Company that's going to be overseen by the royal family. It's going to be ran by the Stuart family, which is Charles II of England and James II, who's eventually going to be dethroned during the Glorious Revolution. And it's going to be run as a corporation in which individuals could buy stocks, just like we talked about in Liverpool, right? And we go back to Liverpool. They have tons of slave ships, and they would that's how people of Liverpool would increase their wealth during this time frame. We'll just, yeah, move that way. Asian trade was ran by the East India Company, which was a large joint stock company based in London. It's going to be one of the sticking points of the American Revolution when England tries to force a monopoly on the American people with tea from the East India Company, right? They're going to bring in tea and cotton and gold and silver bullion from India. And individuals could invest in that and they could make money. And so these are early examples of speculative markets where I'm going to invest, believing that I'm going to make money on my investment. It's a way for wealth to grow. And this idea, and I have a typo there with England or English, this English trade is done within the ideas of mercantilism, in which all this trade is done to increase the wealth of the mother country. And they put regulations on things such as shipping and those types of things. We'll talk about the Navigation Acts, and the book talks about Navigation Acts, and we'll talk about Navigation Acts in the next unit when we talk about the American Revolution, right? In the 1700s, England's dependent on North America and India for trade. Like a lot of the majority of their exports are going to the American colonies or to India. And a large percent, smaller percentage of their imports are coming from them. And so you want a trade balance that's positive to the parent country, in which England is shipping out twice as much as they're bringing into their colonies. However, with the American Revolution, England is going to lose control, or lose that trade balance with the American colonies. But to replace them, England just goes out and picks up new colonies. They no longer need the North American colonies of the Americas. They have Canada. They're going to pick up Asia. Or they're going to pick up a colony in Egypt. They're going to develop Australia and other those places, right? England's going to continue to be dominant in shipbuilding. and we go from there. Slave trade, which we've talked about, plantations. The population of England by 1850 had reached over 12 million, and that's going to allow them a sizable workforce for this industrial revolution that's going to kick off in the early 1800s. And they're going to use that industrial revolution to produce goods and to ship them out and to make money. And that's where we are with trade empires and early ideas on investment and capitalism. So hopefully that makes a little bit of sense. If you have any questions, let me know, and we will see. Good luck on this upcoming test on this unit, and we will see you for the American Revolution and the French Revolution next unit. Talk to you later. Bye bye.